Bueno, buenas tardes a todos. Me llamo Raúl Riesco.
Good afternoon, my name is Raúl, I'm from INCIBE, and we have an interesting panel. Although the time is not perhaps the best one to hold a session, everyone's thinking about coffee, but it's still interesting as we come from two worlds. The world of the underground markets, the dark web. You could never imagine what you can buy in there if you've never been there. But the experts will tell us more about cybercrime. And also the world of cryptocurrency, which has been ongoing, and perhaps given the value of some of them having soared or rocketed this year, well, we haven't really realized how useful they are. My idea is that we should have a short introduction to each one of the topics, and then a few minutes for each of the speakers, and then some round table discussion. We'll make the most to give the floor to the audience. As I said, the issue of the dark web or the anonymous networks is an interesting invention. The aim was for betterment for privacy. It's also used for that too. But the problem is that it has been extended and the privacy has been used by the world of cybercrime. They have decided this is where I can do what I wish. It's not indexed, it's difficult to trace. It goes with ups and downs through different nodes. It was initially thought for good because of encryption. The second component of this roundtable is that of virtual currencies. Originally also designed for good. The idea was to create a currency that would enable us to have transactions between peers based on trust among peers without the need for a third party. So now when you go to pay for anything, you use your credit or debit card. Well, there is a bank. The bank is the trust institution, or Visa or MasterCard. In this case, the use of virtual currencies has become so extended that there are nowadays more than 900 digital currencies. Of course, not all of them have such an extended use as the one we all know. Perhaps Bitcoin is the best known digital currency. We have Auditorium, which is capitalized around $4-point-something billion, and this leads to a certain improvement compared to other virtual coins. In this case, the blockchain enables to execute applications which may be malicious too. In this sense, different digital currencies have issued. Some of them are even launched by individuals. I look at the statistics, but in the last 24 hours there must have been zillions of dollars transacted today. We apologize, we cannot repeat figures if they are given at lightning speed. Recognized publicly, and what you do, you know that miners use their mining capacity to generate trust and enable the transactions. Those who do the commissions were taking 206 Bitcoin worth of transactions, which amounts to $1 million. So to wrap up on the introduction, this panel seems to be very interesting because we bring together these two elements of technological progress, which were initially designed for good. They are both based on encryption, and they are both being used by evil. And if we combine this, we have a time bomb. I'd like to know what the experts have to say. I'll introduce them to you. So, my first speaker, Juan Antonio Rodríguez, the Sotomayor, is head of the Technological Crime Department at the Spanish Civil Guard. He has a master's in security by the Open University, as well as a long curriculum. You have the floor. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'd like to thank INCIBE for inviting us. In this kind of forums, one of the most important things that I consider is to bring reality and explain reality, in this case, in the scope of crime and policing. To speak of crypto coins or crypto markets, in the last year, the Civil Guard has conducted two very important operations that make us obtain sufficient knowledge to fight against all these crimes that are always in the media, but which are rather invisible. Not very long ago, the Civil Guard sold some weapons through a market on the dark web, and we saw how these kinds of markets, which are funded and worked with cryptocurrencies, are markets where fraud and deceit are rampant. We ended up by arresting someone, and he said how he had initially sold the weapons or put them on sale and no one was buying them. He did not achieve enough trust in order for the buyers at the market to request to buy guns. So what he did, he opened up 100 profiles in the forum. He purchased and sold to himself, and he raised the trust, the confidence in this dark web forum by selling this kind of products. So once he gained enough trust in the market, he finally received real requests to buy weapons. And that's how he started to sell them. Nobody realized that it was all fake. So once a request is received, he gives the order to the buyer for the buyer to sell it, to send it to the seller, and he was not even involved in the physical transaction of the guns. Not only that, he always realized that he, in this dark web market, where he is sufficiently anonymous, that he didn't have to actually sell the guns, so he started selling guns that did not exist. So this was a regulated market where there was an administrator to sell the goods, and when the purchase was executed and the customer complained because the customer did not, the goods did not arrive, the gun, he would say, "Oh, it's the seller's fault because they have not delivered, but don't worry, I'll keep 50% of the money you have paid and I'll give you back the other 50%. So at the end of the day, there was no real transaction or anything in this kind of market, but there was enough profit through deceit. That's what underlies most types of the markets we find in the dark web. This is an example of how someone had evolved from starting to sell illicit products, and then not even that, just through straightforward fraud, he obtained a profit. At the end of the day, he wasn't selling. What he was doing was just posting advertisements. He had gained enough trust in order to make money, and if there were any complaints, he at least returned half of the money. In this kind of markets, he was finally arrested because these markets on the dark web are very much policed. They're supervised by thousands of police people who have false profiles and who are supervising the transactions. They soon detected that a Spaniard was selling guns, so this was then notified to the Spanish authorities, and that's how we caught the guy. Another important thing, another operation that we had with an individual who was selling credentials. This guy was selling, he was buying stolen databases in the dark web, and then he was verifying that the credentials were valid, in which case he checked them against the main services through the internet, PayPal, Amazon, Facebook, and he actually managed to sell worth more than 60,000 euros a month by selling credentials using cryptocurrencies, especially bitcoins. And he managed to accumulate 1.9 million PayPal credentials. The market itself said that they were 90% pure, these credentials that he was selling. The curious thing about cryptocurrencies is that the bitcoins that he was generating with the sales, he sent to a contact in Russia, and eventually he would receive a letter with 3 real credit cards in the name of Russian citizens, and through these credit cards he would monetize his bitcoins. So each credit card had the amount of money that he would monetize by selling the bitcoins. The entire system that he had achieved through the dark web. He knew no one in person, but the system was so reliable that he told us, when I lose the PIN code for one of the cards that I'm sent from Russia to withdraw my money, in 24 hours I complain, and in 24 hours I'm sent the new PIN so I can continue to withdraw the money that I am being transferred, as I transfer my bitcoins for selling illegal credentials that I have obtained by purchasing stolen databases. I think these are 2 good examples of how this dark market of deceit works on the dark web, and the ways to work with Bitcoin and how to launder them and turn them into real money in cash. That's all. Thank you very much. So we see the money laundering. That's very interesting. I'll give the floor to the second speaker for this afternoon, who is Carlos Yuste, Chief Inspector of the National Police for IT. He's been working at several different departments of the police. He's also been a teacher at the training center for the police, etc., etc. You have the floor. Thank you very much. Thank you to INCIBE for once again counting on us, for inviting the police forces to this event, which I believe is perhaps one of the state-of-the-art meetings in this respect. I think there's a clear consensus as to the research in the dark web that is complicated. We have to add the encrypted communication or the encrypted browsing, anonymity. If to this we add the use of virtual currencies, then this leads to an environment that is privileged or at least favorable to criminals. With regards to virtual currencies, in 2013, within an operation called Ransom, we managed to seize a Bitcoin purse. Going back to Ransom, the police virus, the criminal organization would be paid in electronic money, not virtual currencies. So in 4 years, we've seen the explosion of the use of virtual currencies by cyber criminals. Practically any service or product purchased in the dark web has to be done with virtual currencies. At the time, there was only the Bitcoin. I think now we have more than 1,000 different digital currencies. Some are perfectly established. In Ethereum, little coin, some of them are even more anonymous for the criminals. With regards to research into the dark or investigations in the dark web, this year the FBI has conducted a huge operation. They have dismantled Alphabet and the colleagues in Holland, Hansa. We had our own operation a few years ago, perhaps the largest ever since I joined the section. This was an individual who had filtered more than 100,000 credit card numbers, which he sold in these underground markets. Alphabet was precisely the most active one, and the money was monetized through bitcoins. The complexity of the investigation is tremendous. You have to find a tiny thread to pull and then eventually come down to the physical world. If you have investigation in the web, you have to have some threads in order to be successful. What about the future? What line do we follow in the dark web? What we need is collaboration. We have a clear example here with the INCIBE, with perfect collaboration, and also collaborate with the private sector, where we have companies devoted to cybersecurity and companies that are defending themselves from cyber criminals. We have to create the necessary communication channels that are two-way, of course, and build trust. So with this symbiosis, we can defend ourselves from cybercrime. Something that is common to all the police forces, that is human resources. At the end of the day, we have to use people who have decided at some point to change their professional orientation and devote it to civil service. They need to have some prior knowledge, some education. And ever since someone decides to start doing this, up until the time when they become a civil servants, but at least 3 years may go by, in the best of cases. So this delays the incorporation of new professionals for a long time. And in 3 years, in this day and age, many things can happen, making it even more difficult. Finally, we need tools. We're speaking about a very complex world, that of the dark web. We need tools in order to investigate and research into this matter. We do have collaboration. Once again, INCIBE is the example. In this case, we have opted, in the light of budget cuts and so forth, we open up to the market, to the public sector, to the private sector. So within the framework of the Horizon 2020 program by the European Commission, we are involved in 2 projects which have been adopted and now are being developed. One does not relate directly to this topic. It's called Ramses, but the other one does fit in like a glove. That's the titanium project. The idea is to provide a valid tool in order that any transactions in the underground market and all the use of bitcoins may be supervised. This is the current stage of development, and let's see where we arrive at eventually. Thank you very much, Carlos. We'll have time during the discussion afterwards to expound on some of the proposals we have for improvement. I'd like to give now the floor to our colleague Jarek. He's a strategic analyst at EUROPOL. Prior to that, he was a criminal analyst in the National Irish Police. He has 2 degrees in economics and forensic IT, research into cybercrime. After working for the Irish police, he went to the Netherlands, where he joined Europol, especially specializing in bitcoins. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. And I have to thank INCIBE very much for inviting me. It's a privilege to be present at this event. And just to give you a very brief overview of what I will be talking about, first I will cover some basic Bitcoin trends before I tell you what really makes Bitcoin attractive to criminals, and then spend a while talking what Europol and other law enforcement agencies are doing about this phenomenon. So when it comes to Bitcoin basic trends, it is very easy to summarize it. Basically, everything is going up. Bitcoin is going up in terms of downloaded wallets, which means we have more and more Bitcoin users. It's going up in terms of adoption, which means there are more merchants accepting it. There are more places where you can spend your Bitcoins. There is also rising amount of exchangers, which means that there are more places where you can buy Bitcoins and sell Bitcoins. There are also increasing number of Bitcoin ATMs, which is now around 1,700 around the earth. And you may think that it is not such a huge number, but you also have to take into consideration that 3 years ago, this number was 0. And also, most importantly, Bitcoin is growing in terms of transactions. We now have about 300 transactions, Bitcoin transactions per day, and this number has been growing up over the last few years as well. So we see that there is a huge increase in legitimate use of Bitcoin, which is reflected by growing price of Bitcoin. And hand in hand with this popularity, we can also see increasing criminal use of Bitcoin. It is simply bound to happen, and it is bound to happen not only due to increasing Bitcoin ecosystem, but also because of Bitcoin characteristics that make its use attractive to criminals. So Bitcoin obviously is global in nature. You can buy it and sell it almost anywhere around the earth. Bitcoin is also pseudonymous, which means that it is very difficult to track. Not sure how many of you have actually checked Bitcoin blockchain, but if you do, what you will find inside is one Bitcoin address sending funds to another Bitcoin address. You also see when the transaction happened and how many Bitcoins were sent from one party to another. But you don't know the most important question, or you don't know the answer to the most important question, and that is, who is the owner of which Bitcoin address? So you can find a lot of information in the Bitcoin blockchain, but you still need an attribution which has to be provided by the private sector. Which also, what is also making Bitcoins attractive to criminals is the fact that Bitcoin transactions are irreversible. So unlike, let's say, credit card transactions, Bitcoin transactions are final. There is no chargeback with Bitcoin payments. Once you send your Bitcoins to the attacker, your Bitcoins are gone forever. There is no remedy, there is no chargeback, which is obviously one of the reasons why Bitcoin is so predominantly used by ransomware. So what is Europol doing about this phenomenon? Obviously, investigation is one large part where we assist law enforcement around Europe, but we also have many other activities, namely training, other forms of education, and prevention. And when it comes to prevention, we are running a website called nomoreransom.org, which is a bit different than most of the other crime prevention efforts out there. It is not only giving you crime prevention advice, what to do in order to not be affected by ransomware, but it will also identify the ransomware if you were already infected by it. So if you happen to be infected by ransomware, you may try visiting No More Ransom website, and perhaps the ransomware that infected you will be identified, and the website may be able to provide you with decryption key as well. So you may end up getting your data back without having to pay the attacker. So, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jarek. Presento al siguiente.
The next speaker is David Sancho.
David es senior malware researcher y lleva prácticamente.
He's a senior researcher for 20 years now. He has been working hard on defensive technologies and investigating viruses and malware.
I was going to speak about how complicated it is to investigate the dark web, and in particular the Tor web. The Tor web, just for you to understand it, as if we were Christmas on the high street, and we can just talk to those around us, and we can send a small message to a person around us, and we can say whatever. We just throw it in a bowl, and we tell the other guy, okay, give it to Juan. Ask around and find Juan. So the paper goes around until Juan says, okay, I have it. I do not know where Juan is. Juan doesn't know where I am. And nobody in between knows about us or has seen them. They might have seen the message or not at random. And then a number of people may have touched the message. So this drives us crazy because we know that anonymity that's been used by criminals to first have sales services, all sorts of illegal things, weapons, as a colleague was saying, drugs, whatever, malware, anything. And of course, you can stand in between and wait for a message to come, but it may come to you or not, and you do not know where they're coming from and where they're going to, so they drive you crazy. So that's one thing. And then another thing is that there are many malware authors who have control servers for their malware located in this Tor network. So when you get infected, you get a Tor customer so that your requests go in this way to the control server. And nobody knows where it is, but they managed to get there, and you're trying to listen to it, and you cannot know what the message is and where the control server is. So this is really complex, and our investigation is complicated because of that. So we try to access those forums. Of course, if you're a customer, you go to the forum and you see how content is managed. So a criminal says, I want a gun, and another guy says, I sell a kilo of drugs, and you can manage the content and see who is sharing what, who is selling what, and after that, you may know who the users are. When you look at the content, you can really go to the usual criminal forums and see whether it matches, whether the users are the same. And through that content, sometimes you understand where it's coming from. For example, if they're speaking in Russian, then they might be coming from that country. But these are very slow processes. Our investigation is very slow, and you are waiting for them to put their foot in it, to make a mistake, and then you go in and you catch them. So sometimes it is encrypted or whatever, but if they have put their foot in it, then that's it. So our work, our investigation is very complicated and slow. We also analyze the type of content that's being shared through these hidden webs. We look at the language, the type of sales, if they're selling stuff. We see if these are opinion forums, what kind of opinions are being shared. So we have those statistics, we've shared them. A couple of years ago, we created a report about the type of content that's more frequent in the dark web. You can download it. You can download the PDF. I think it's really interesting. But the only thing that it does is to give you some hints about the use or the abuse of technology through these webs. And they have such an important potential for criminals. They are there to offer anonymous services so that anybody can express their opinion, and that the government, even if they're against it, they cannot interfere with that. So you can happily say whom you like and who you don't like without your government thinking that you're a dissident. And in some places we know that freedom of expression, unfortunately, is very much in danger. So it's good that people can use these resources to express themselves, to exercise their freedom of expression, but criminals take advantage of this because criminals can also use the capacities and sell illegal stuff, and they make use of these technologies that were meant for something else. And in line with what Carlos was saying, from the point of view of the police, we work together with the police because there's no other way out. When we come to the end of these investigations, we have some details and we have to do something about it. It's not just a matter of statistics or a pie chart. we really have to see where things are developing and whether this guy is a criminal, this guy is selling malware. I can't do anything with that, but I can give it to the police, to the Spanish police or any other forces, depending on where the criminal is, and they can start their own investigation and or else follow that line of research or investigation, and they can work as the colleague from Interpol was saying. So I think our sector and the police and law enforcement agencies have to work together. Okay, thank you so much for that. We are now going to open the floor for the debate. But at first, I'd like to ask a question myself, because I know that, and we mentioned this before we came in, that our guests, speakers, want to share some ideas with you regarding improvements and to speak about the most important difficulties or barriers that we have today, and also the ones we will be seeing in the future, and the proposals that we'll have for those situations, but from a legal perspective, international cooperation, or private-public cooperation. So we can start a discussion now. You can speak in any order. If you want to answer or say something, you're free to do so. I think we have 12 minutes for that. Carlos? Okay, I'll start. Maybe I think the problem is clear. The jurisdiction that we have is national, so it's at state level. So a TOR is everywhere. And the mechanisms that we have now to request information from another country, this is a very slow process, a very slow vehicle. So it's not up to date with this particular sphere. And I'd just like to share a decision by court with you of 21st December 2016 of the European Court of Justice, saying that the data of traffic cannot be undifferentiated. It has to be localized somewhere. So in a nutshell, to explain this, I'm afraid that this is going to bring an end to Law 25/2017. So service suppliers have to keep the information, that's what our law says, for a while. And now maybe with this decision by the court, then the deadline will be shorter. And in our case, we need to look at things in time. If we want to have an IP or have a supplier, then a service provider, maybe that's not registered anymore. So we will come to a cul-de-sac.
So I mentioned that Bitcoin transaction may be difficult to track, but there are also another set of huge issues with virtual currencies. And one of the issues is seizure, and we are going to have increasing, see increasing issues with seizure, because criminals can really store bitcoins in many possible ways. They can have it on their devices, mobile phones, computers. They can have them online. They can have them on a piece of paper, because that's all it takes to record your private key. Or they can have a specialized device like this one, which is called Bitcoin hardware wallet. And in fairness, I'm storing most of my private property on this single device. And the only way of getting money out of me, the only way of finding out how much money do I have and seizing the money is to take possession of this device and get the PIN from me. So this is something that law enforcement will fight against in the years to come. It is going to be problems with tracing and problems with getting assets, getting them from criminals' hands.
Yes, speaking about these problems and the problems of investigating crime linked to technology and IT, We would need to have a whole afternoon for that at least. It's a very complex problem. But to highlight something, I think that crime, this is a form of crime that's not very mature in society from the point of view of police work. And I'll give you an example. For example, in the field of drugs, all police forces in the world know that this is a crime and they know how to address it. We have specific units working in that field. For example, drug sales, retail sales are common crime related to drug trafficking, and then there are specialized units to look at the larger sphere of drug trafficking. That's more important for safety and for citizens' safety. But for cybercrime, we do not have that. We do not have that yet. The police forces, they are having difficulties with the common crimes related to cybercrime. For example, we may have situation of harassment or bullying through IT. This is a topic that is complex to investigate, and we have a technological side to it. We have to analyze social media profiles, have access to all the terminals of all the kids who could be involved in bullying, and we have to get a lot of information. But in order to have those capacities to investigate this, nowadays we know that the police forces have started on top, and we have centralized units that are more specialized, and they have different capacities, and now they're involved in going after cyber crime that's far more common, this petty crime, without going into the organized crime aspects, which are the two examples I gave before, and related to source market. So if we add to this that most victims of organized cybercrime do not present a complaint, at least in Spain, and also not in Germany or nowhere. Nowadays, any company that has been a victim of a cyber incident, be it related to crime or not, their credibility level goes down. So society is not ready, is not mature to accept this and to accept that a bank has had a phishing incident, as it happened in Spain. We've had some cases of some of the big banks in Spain that had phishing in Google AdWords, without their knowledge. And we told them, thanks to the arrest of a person who was linked to the organization that was behind it. So even with the best technologies in the world to detect it, they didn't realize. And they were reluctant to present a complaint, because, and then we cannot do anything about this. We cannot prosecute them. So to summarize, this is a moment in which everything is in constant evolution, and we really need to see the way in which we behave in the real world, and we're speaking about crime, of course, and look at cybercrime, and that we need the resources and the structures and the legislation that we have, but apply them to the cyber world. And as we said before, we lack resources. This is one of the problems we have to face. And to conclude, one of the things that characterize the prosecution of criminals is that the most important technology for the administration to do their job is in the hands of private companies. And we have to know how to get that technology and the knowledge and bring them to crime in an efficient and effective way. David? Just a very brief comment. I agree with everything that was said. I'd like to highlight the importance of sharing information, because we're all gathering information. There's so much information around us. But bringing the information together and sharing it, that's where power lies. Not just in terms of a public-private cooperation, working with the police forces, but across different police bodies. So in Spain, there's chaos with the national police, with the Mossos d'Esquadra, with the civil guard. This happens in other countries. In France and Italy, there's the same situation. So each of these police bodies have information of different kind, isolated to one another. Somebody has to bring the information together. I think EUROPOL is doing a great job, but we still have much to do. And from the point of view of private companies, of course, we gather a lot of information. We collect all sorts of information from and about criminals, we really need to not just have information throughout time, but to share it. And this is, for example, as I was saying before about the dark web, there are a lot of people saying all sorts of stuff in the dark web, and you cannot follow them, but they're in a forum, and this is so-and-so. So this user so-and-so, same as all criminals, first started doing small stuff, petty crime, and then has gone bigger and bigger, and now they're doing big stuff, big things in the dark web. If you go to all forums 3 years ago outside the dark web, you see user so-and-so who was doing that already. So if you've done your homework and if you followed up all the forums for 3 years, you have a track record of the information, and you can connect the information, link this information. Who has that information? Nobody and everyone. We all have bits and pieces of the information. The secret is bringing the information together and draw conclusions out of this. And this is still a problem we have, not just gathering crumbs, all of us, but having a global, a comprehensive approach and assessment of this whole sector market. I think we have time for just one question. Would you like to ask a question? Yes, we have one. Could we have the microphone? Good afternoon. Thank you very much, first of all, for this amazing panel. I have a simple question for you. Is it easier for you to arrest criminals when they use bitcoins or when they use cash? What is more difficult in relative terms? So what is more difficult for the armed forces to trace? The use of cash or the use of bitcoins or cryptocurrencies? This is an easy one. I can answer this one. No doubt, cash is easier. That's why criminals are going to cybercurrency almost exclusively, because tracing it is so difficult. And now, as we have so many currencies that are consolidated, cybercurrencies, they exchange their currencies. So it is very difficult to follow this. This is anonymous, and there might be transactions. But if we exchange the currency, then that's very difficult. So cash is always easier. And that's why I was mentioning this operation before. They still didn't get a ransom in virtual currencies. They had it in cash. So we can trace that. But Bitcoin, that's so difficult to trace. So it's easy. Is it easier? But no, it's easier with cash. Even if cash, in definition, is anonymous. Cash is anonymous by definition. But if I have a ransom encryption, and then we're not going to pay in cash to a cyber criminal, you can just use vouchers or virtual cryptocurrencies. Yes, but anyway, looking at transactions in cash is also difficult. The business email compromise, where the companies are tricked into transferring money like we had in Spain. Almost 10 million euros being transferred. They were tricked. And then looking at the movement of money, that's also difficult. Banks try to make our work easier, of course, but this is very difficult when you see that there's a network behind that. In less than 48 hours, they have moved 10 million euros around 20 countries. Each of them had taken their share of the cake, and they have gone to another bank. They have moved it, and there are organized crime networks to make the best out of the situation. Yeah, and in business email compromise, we had the Amazonic operation here, and those mules at least give you something that you can look at. The mule is the most basic element in those organizations, but at least you have something to look into. You see where the money is going, and as we did at the time, you pull that thread, and then we see. But of course, it's very difficult to see the criminal structure behind it. But you have somewhere to begin with. But if we're speaking about virtual coins, that's more difficult. We do not have any time left. We're so sorry. But we'd just like to close the panel by thanking you all for your presence. And I think that this is complicated with the wallet device that Jarek showed us. It makes things even more difficult. We've seen operations that you've done, suddenly the money is all over the bed, the cash is on the bed. But if you have it on this wallet, there's no way you can extract it unless you have the password. So to summarize, I think that we have all understood what cryptocurrencies are. We've known the state of the art of some cybercrime businesses in the dark web, especially when there are sales and purchases of services, some trends in cybercrime. Jarek has explained why using cryptocurrencies is attractive for cybercrime. And we've had some examples of operations by law enforcement and some innovation. And we've finished with some barriers and proposals for improvement where we can highlight sharing information, international cooperation, and keeping the information, the altcoins. And these are challenges in terms of investigation funding and the physical wallets and the use of technology of the private sector. That's where investments are being made, and we need to have private-public cooperation to face these challenges. Thank you all for being here with us, and I will leave you to listen to the next panel.